Hello, everyone. Professor Barry here. Just giving you a little bit of background for week four. It's kind of a review time period. It's not midterm yet. I don't really do, let's say, a midterm. There's no midterm exam. Uh, Usually, my midterms, my classes are about reviewing, applying. Let's just get grounded in the stuff that we've been through so far to make sure it's sticking with us before kind of moving forward. So that's kind of the goal for this particular week. You could think about it as like a midterm application. You can think about reviewing content. It's about making connections, reviewing additional information, providing more content in this area of race, class, gender, to dive in a little bit deeper, ultimately to foster a deeper level of appreciation and understanding of the assignment or of the content. Yeah, so for this week, you're going to select two of the following podcasts to listen to. Isabel Wilkerson's talk about a book she wrote called Caste, which I believe has recently turned into a movie as well. I have not seen it. The book is really fascinating. Her talking about the book is fascinating, and what her focus is with Caste, just to give you a little preview so you can help determine which one of these you want to listen to, is she got interested in kind of like, well, interested in structure and the ways in which structured inequality get formed and replicated, and how we live in an environment that, or a community, a society, that there's a hierarchy, there's structures in place that are fairly mobility is fairly limited, that we have an economic system that requires a caste system to do the work necessary to maintain this economic system. Now, that sounds like a lot of academic jargon, probably in some ways. Her book is fascinating. Her talk is fascinating, just about how we think about structure, how we think about its systems. I think you find it interesting and valuable. She also talks about, it's that class, social class becomes an important driving force, and that race becomes part of that as well. But to think beyond, think in addition to race, think about class as a main and power as a larger feature of this system. So valuable work, great investigation, interesting storytell about caste. Shannon Sullivan, she's a philosopher by trade. She was an existential philosopher, curious about existence. She got into somewhere in her academic career, started thinking about gender and gender identity. And she got into thinking about and unpacking racial identity. She wrote a book called Good White People, and it's an interesting investigation about um, liberals who identify what whites who identify as being liberal, their professed ideas about sort of racial equality, but for some it's more about signaling a virtue or an idea and differentiating themselves between one group, like the moral upstanding white, versus the uneducated racist white, like this idea, right? And so it's an interesting investigation, and thinking about whiteness in a more complete way, thinking about the ways in which racial identity happen and form. I think you might find that valuable as well. And she's curious. I mean, she's ultimately, I think, embodies the idea of just curiosity about race and racial identity. And then the last one, The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein. The book is really fascinating if you ever get a chance to read the book, The Color of the Law. As a speaker, it may be a little bit more challenging to get into as a speaker. Uh, but the content is super interesting and important to understand the ways in which the legal system has influenced the historical development of housing and segregation in the United States. The topic area is incredibly valuable and important, and a powerful illustration of how structures are created through the legal system that influence degrees of segregation or integration within society itself. So maybe a little bit more challenging to listen to, but the content really important, historically important, valuable, and it's important to understand the past to understand the present. One of the reasons I include podcasts for in this class, maybe more than others, is sometimes hearing the voice of the author can become really important. So we can hear their emotion behind their words, can hear how they got into their project. And I mean, I appreciate and value those who are trying to develop and who are not try, who are working on developing and have developed an analysis of content. It's not coming from a place of emotional angst. It's coming from a place of curiosity, desire to know, understanding, and very thoughtful. And sometimes when we're reading words on a page, we don't get the tone of the author, but through podcast, we can get that tone of the author. What I want you to do in your write-up for this week, so if you go to the weekly assignment, it's about reviewing this content. I want you to be making some applications. So these bullet points here, thinking about this, like where in this content of the two that you listen to, do you find the sociological imagination? Where, why, how? Any of the three different theories, like how are these related to, or where do they integrate with the material? Intersectionality, race, class, gender identity, sexual identity, different parts of our identity that are intersectional. Where does that come through? Thinking about social construction of reality versus biological and social construction notions of race. What about privilege and disadvantage, privilege and domination, white privilege? What about the connection between the two? So that like to integrate not only like some content from the podcast, but also some of these ideas. And it doesn't have to be like long, like, but just to integrate, like, oh man, here's a great place where a great example of that idea of social construction of race that came through in that podcast. And then for the discussion board, we're going to be focusing on, you're going to be writing about the matrix of domination and its application, like where you saw it in the podcast. So keep that in mind as you're listening to the podcast. All right, enjoy the material for the week. Thanks for all you do. Have a great day.